Okay.
Jonathan and is giving some other talk. I don't know
I
what.
saw, it's okay.
So I didn't get that email with the one you're referring to that went to everybody.
It said that he CC'd the core faculty.
I think our faculty was our best up.
Because I didn't get it. See, I mean, the only unread emails in my inbox are irrelevant stuff.
Gee, how do you reach that state? I've been waiting for years to have.
I look at everything from Jonathan, the last thing he was about.
It was sent to, like Beamer core faculty or something.
Yeah, but you know, at some point, you remember, somebody kicked me off of the BMO core faculty?
Oh,
Yeah,
I never got
our
that
lists
back.
are a mess.
I know what happened. I think he used the old one. So you switched it to Beamer primary faculty, and I think he didn't change the new listserv name.
So I didn't get the memo, so I'm off the hook.
So,
Okay, so do I, wait, I'm going to sign into Zoom presumably.
you shouldn't need to actually. You should be able to just.
So I just hit start mirroring?
Yeah. And then you should be. Yep. There you go.
So that's good. And now I should find where is the talk? In what, by carefully organized. This way.
So yeah, actually, now that I think about it, I think that is what happened. I think you used the old faculty listserv name instead of the new one that you change it to, which is primary faculty.
Yeah, and also I heard from Steve Goodman, who asked for a list of our faculty. Hi. To get a list of our faculty, and apparently Dan Katz was not on the list. And I don't know who gave him the list, and I don't know how that happened.
I'm not sure either. He's on the listservs and the current lists. I know.
Yeah, this is why we But this is yet another instance of the same.
Yeah,
phenomenon.
yeah. Yeah, okay, that was CC core fact.
Grab what we want to do. Game of operations. Very possible.
It's often close to the wall. Let's- What?
Pretty good, just trying to get back. You know, a lot of back and forth.
Yeah. What happened to this year? Yes. Really? So where? Yes.
Just for family or family? End of the year.
Might have to moderate soon after.
No.
I think just.
Hello.
It goes. It goes.
He is on there, then I'll worry about it.
Hey.
Just-
Take on navigating the
Like
Oh,
an AI, but.
it's
Hmm?
good.
You
Oh,
know,
no, sorry. No, no, you're on the, so, yeah.
There you are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She wanted me to be a co-founder of that.
Well, I
Like
think
2 years ago. She's really nice. I just didn't know if you had to read on.
I was thinking what
Any of the understanding.
I know her as a causal inference. researcher.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
She's doing imaging.
Yeah, I think like turret track
It's gonna be an
and
amazing-
unstructured data.
It's NLP.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Scotty talked to her, I talked to her.
If she can do the job that.
Yeah, I'll get it.
$80,000.
I'll talk to her then.
Yeah, so we can do it for 50.
I don't know what their technology is, so the problem, yeah, we'll see what.
Right, put it in the room.
Right.
So that's the reason I'm in Thornton 102. They've lived in the past few years.
I'm gonna post on.
It is 3 to 4:20.
And the most I can do, like creative stuff.
Exactly, yeah.
What time is it? 9:30. Yeah, students come at 9:30. It's really fun. It's different. Well, I'm happy to hear that.
And I ended up in.
And I went without incident.
Oh
my God. Oh my God, I got that partying. Wow.
That's doable.
I'm also getting that. So I have this book, 800 pages. And I'm using it for the class. Yes. We did the reading.
When will it be done?
Almost if I can.
Way too hot in the sun.
Well, I know what it's promised, but.
No, I haven't-
I don't abandon it.
Yes, I haven't, you know. Yes. I have a million people reading it.
Are you gonna make a joke now? That's really funny.
Are you happy with the reception yesterday? What can we do?
No, I was trying, I'm still not fully living myself. I couldn't tell people about. So,
Oh, so the announcement is not,
no, Tuesday,
which Tuesday?
next Tuesday.
Next Tuesday.
No,
And what happens?
and
I'm expecting the invitation to a party.
there's the other side. That's what I'm.
Can tell you what it's about.
Yeah, okay. Well, as long as it's not recorded, you can help people.
I don't know if the Zoom here is on or not.
It is on. It's on. It is on.
We're doing our banter right now.
Okay, that's why I'm.
Okay. And I guess I should just start, because Jonathan is not here to do small talk with me.
Oh, this is you.
What? Yeah, I'm not going to eat and talk. Okay, I'm gonna get started. Jonathan is not here today, unfortunately. He had to give a talk at this hour elsewhere. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Mark Musen. I'm on the faculty in Biomedical Informatics Research. And I've been.
I can ask the Jonathan question, which he always asks, which is that, tell us a little bit about yourself, what brought you here, what got you into research in the first place?
You do that with the right inflection as well.
So,
What brought me? I came to Stanford a long time ago. I came here as a medical intern in 1980. Did a residency and stayed here because I grew up in the East Coast. Including California, but just the right place to be. I love California. The weather was beautiful. I had a great 1-bedroom apartment for $350 a month.
This is why we're all here.
So that's why I came here. I ran into Ted Shortlis at that time, and he encouraged me to join his PhD program, and I liked it, and I thought what he was doing was great, and that's why I actually stayed. So that's the nutshell. Jonathan said I must give a talk about RADx, because RADx is this project that's been going on in my group now for the past couple of years that everybody hears about, because a lot of people are involved in it. A lot of people in this room are involved in the RADx project. And it's a big deal for us, but we don't have that much of an opportunity to tell the rest of the world what's going on. So that's why I'm going to give you an overview. So RADx, well, first of all, our work is called the RADx Data Hub. And we'll talk about what we mean by a data hub in a moment. The RADx program is a very big deal at NIH. or it will be a big deal until about a couple days from now. You may remember there used to be a virus called, there used to be a disease caused by a virus, the disease is COVID-19. We know that COVID-19 is no longer a problem. No one ever gets this virus anymore. There's no longer a public health threat. But 5 years ago, it's hard to imagine, the world was obviously turned upside down with this enormous fear about a new virus that was actually causing enormous amounts of death. With no vaccine on the horizon at that point, and no real ability to test for someone who was infected with the virus. It was a very, very big problem. And so NIH created a program called RADx, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And then a couple of years later realized, hey, we need to have some mechanism of storing all the data that the RADx program is generating. And that's why we have the RADx Data Hub. But before I talk about that, let me mention that the RADx Data Hub is a project that involves a lot of people, only some of whom are in this slide. And really want to emphasize that what I'm going to be talking about today is work that's been done by really a cast of thousands at 3 major institutions. So lots of people, some of whom are in this room whom you know, and the program basically is organized through Stanford. So we are the center of the hub, if you will. And the hub has 2 big subcontractors. One is Booz Allen Hamilton, which is, some of you know, a large consulting firm, which also does a lot of software engineering. The other is a Renaissance Computing Institute at UNC, which is kind of like the equivalent of what SRI was to Stanford before SRI was completely separated out. There's strong ties between RENC and UNC, but they're really viewed as separate organizations, even though a lot of the administration is shared. In our organization, Stanford is mainly responsible for data standards, data harmonization, and overall management of the project. The overall manager, in fact, is Marcos, who's sitting in the back row. Marcos is responsible for all this stuff on the slide. That's why he looks so tired. We manage these 2 subcontracts, one to Booz Allen Hamilton. They're involved mainly in a lot of software engineering for the data hub itself. RENC is really a wonderful organization that is involved in our outreach activities, is involved in administration, helping us organize our meetings, helps communication. And in fact, the slides that I'm showing you today were largely created by RENC. And so if I'm struggling to figure out what's on the slides, it's because they're not my slides. RENC did all the artwork and really did all the work to give you a beautiful impression of what the Data Hub is all about. The Data Hub is organized with a close interaction with NIH. We are talking to our program officer at NIH several times a week. I have never been involved in a project at NIH where we have this kind of close interaction with program staff. And really, there's a lot of investment in what we do because it turns out, well, until a few days from now, COVID is something which has a lot of importance to the government for obvious reasons. What we do at Stanford and what we do in the hub overall is something that gets reported on a weekly basis to the director of the NIH. It gets reported on a monthly basis to the White House, the OSTP, the Office of Science and Technology Policy. And I've never been involved in a project that's had so much scrutiny in the past as well. We have lots to be proud of. We're not worrying about it, but I just want to give you a sense for what that level of interaction is. And the method of funding, for those of you who care, is not a grant, it's not a contract, it's an other transaction. And these other transactions allow the government to have a lot of interaction with the scientific staff, a lot of direction, and a lot of control over how funding gets spent, actually. And by the way, interrupt me at any time. I'm going to try to, to give you the best overview that I can. So we're talking about the hub, talking about what system features it has, talking about our work at Stanford on data harmonization and sort of what we learned about all this. So let's first of all start by talking about the hub. So RADx stands for Rapid Acceleration Diagnostics. So there were a couple of major COVID initiatives when the pandemic began in 2020, one of which was the fact that we were caught really off guard. We didn't have good diagnostic tests for the coronavirus, and there was an enormous effort to try to bring together the government's resources to give us the kinds of tests that we needed. So RADx overall is a research program that's concerned with diagnostic testing. And there are 4 major branches, if you will, of the RADx program. This gives you a flavor for where the government was actually putting its resources at the time. So there's RADx Up, or UP. RADx Up is looking at underserved populations, recognizing that in underserved populations, there was a strong resistance to COVID testing, a real concern about whether ultimately COVID vaccines would be appropriate. And so there's a lot of emphasis on seeing whether we could enhance the uptake of diagnostic testing in underserved populations. RADx Up was centered at Duke. Those of you who know Warren Kibbe, who used to be at NCI, Warren Kibbe was until very recently the PI of RADx Up. RADx Rad is for radical diagnostic testing. RADx Rad really was looking at a variety of things from genomic testing to looking at wastewater. And RADx Rad is probably one of the largest component of the RADx program. RADx Rad was originally organized out of UCSD. Lucila Odo Machado, if you know her, was the PI. And she actually still is PI as RADx Rad, moved to Yale with her, but RADx Rad is now kind of going out of business, as are all of these groups, mainly because, well, COVID's not a threat anymore, you all know. Finally, we have RADx Tech, which has this kind of nebulous goal of looking at ways of enhancing the commercialization of diagnostic testing and looking at problems that could be resolved that help bring tests to market more quickly. RADx DHT, which is digital health technology, is looking at gizmos and gadgets. DHT is mainly looking at wearables and other kinds of cool stuff that could help with RADx diagnosis. And those are the 3 components of RADx. And as we'll say in a moment, for each one of these components of the RADx mission, there is a data coordinating center, which is responsible for managing the data that come out of each of the 4 branches of the RADx project.
Who are the leaders of those two? Tech.
Pardon?
Who are the PIs of Tech and DHT?
I don't remember. I'm looking at my colleagues here. Tech and DHT are relatively small initiatives compared to Up and Rad. I do not remember who their PIs are. And there's a lot of nuance here in terms of their data, which I'm not going to get into right now.
Are there commercial partners?
Pardon?
Are there commercial partners in tech?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. But who are they? I don't know. So as you can gather, operationally, we spend most of our time worrying about RADx Up and RADx Rad. Just because that's where the data are coming from in their largest form. And NIH views this whole thing as a big success. From their perspective, there are 10 over-the-counter tests that have emerged from RADx investigators. There are 500 publications, there are 30 patents or so. And so if you ask NIH, this was a big win and a real success. The other component of the program, which doesn't get as much play, but it's just as important, is that obviously when this began, there was no community of investigators who cared about COVID. There was no mechanism for people working in the area of coronavirus to talk about possible testing, to talk about possible interventions to prevent or treat the disease. And so one of the components of RADx, which doesn't get as much play, is that it also created a community, created opportunities to change policy with respect to testing, and really improved mitigation strategies because we made testing so available. Now all of us know we can just, I don't know if we still can do that, but until recently, we can still get free tests from the post office. Okay. That's great. And about maybe a year or 2 into the whole RADx program, and I said, well, wait a minute. We've got all this data. People people are gonna wanna study this data. People want to do secondary analyses of the data. There are gonna be future pandemics, God forbid, and we'll want to be able to understand how we approach COVID in order to deal with those future pandemics. No one was saying avian flu at the time, but we're all saying it now. And people recognized we need a mechanism not only to have DCCs, data coordinating centers, manage the data for these 4 branches of the RADx program, but we need a hub that will put this all together, that will harmonize data, that will make it particularly easy for investigators who are not involved in the RADx program currently to do secondary analyses. And again, the goal was to have open science, to have reuse of data, and all that good stuff that is obviously important to my research program. And that made this the idea of competing for the opportunity to work on the RADx Data Hub seem attractive. This was at a time for us, when we wrote our original proposal, when Deloitte, another large consulting company, had already been given a contract to create our RADx Data Hub, which was not viewed as a particular success. And so one of the reasons that we had the opportunity to compete for an RFA for a new hub was the NIH was losing confidence in Deloitte's approach. And so basically we at that point went into a bid with Booz Allen Hamilton to create a hub. It turns out our proposal was not accepted as it was written. They kind of liked what Stanford was doing. They were leery about what Booz Allen was doing, and they created their own consortium. And the OTA mechanism, the other transaction authority mechanism, allows NIH to mix and match and create teams any way it pleases. It's very different from a grant application. And so they took us, they paired us with the Broad Institute, they paired us with Renzi. Needless to say, this particular consortium did not last. NIH decided at some point, well, maybe what we really want is Stanford and Booz Allen again and Renzi. And so basically we are now in the 3rd iteration of the RADx Data Hub. And that's what I'll be talking about today. So basically you can see that the whole goal here is to create a secure cloud-based platform that will allow secondary analysis of data created through the RADx. And there are different kinds of data that are being created that are available through RADx. You can get the sense we're talking about devices, we're talking about diagnostic, wastewater surveillance, evaluation of vaccine response, community outreach, and social determinants of health, particularly important for the RADx underserved population component. With outreach basically across the country, obviously you can see there are certain areas, particularly urban areas, that have gotten the most attention. And we're really at the point we now have hundreds of studies that people want to integrate. And you look at what's currently in the Data Hub, we're talking about 10 different study domains, 170 studies, 50 metadata files, and for us, 1,200 data files, all of which need to be brought together in some coherent. So that's our task. So how can we use this stuff for secondary research? So some examples are kind of understanding and reducing transmission risk and disparities in different populations. That requires going back to the data, looking at them, and understanding these kinds of issues. Understanding what are the critical parameters for modeling different studies, linking RADx data with external data sets, with a lot of interest in being able to correlate what we're seeing in terms of disease in a population, with evidence from wastewater, what's happening in social determinants of health, and how does that affect uptake of disease or use of diagnostic testing. So you can see all kinds of things that people are interested in. So that's really the opportunity here. The problem, and I'll keep on saying this is not the way you want to do secondary analysis of data. You don't want to start a massive multi-million-dollar federal program and then 2 years into it say, hey, maybe we should see how these data might be integrated. It would have been so much more intelligent if there was the ability to recognize upfront that we wanted to actually have integration of data from the get-go, rather than trying to impose integration and standardization of data after the fact. And we'll see some of the implications of that. Anyway, when you look at the Data Hub, what you see is a pipeline where I mentioned there are these 4 different groups within RADx getting funding from different institutes at NIH. And the thing also to emphasize is that if you're a RADx investigator, you've written a proposal to do some sort of a study, you get funded by the NIH for your study. They tell you what group you're going to be in, whether you're in RADx Up or RADx Rad or RADx THT or whatever. And basically, you then submit your data after you've done your studies and created your publications to one of the data coordinating centers, the DCCs. The data coordinating centers have the responsibility to take the data and give it to us in the data hub. And in the best of all possible worlds, we'll be in a situation where the data hub has all this great data and researchers and data coordinating centers and staff and system administrators and basically everybody who cares about COVID, you get access to the data, can use the data to do all the stuff that they want to do.
Good question.
Yeah, Mike.
Who made the data model? Whose data model did you use? I guess is a real question.
There is not an overarching data model for the data themselves.
So a person represented in many different ways.
I will get to that,
Okay.
but, you know,
This sounds like NIH creating a resource like Gene Expression Omnibus or NCBI or something. Why do they want a research team leading it?
because unlike Geo, the data sets are not all of the same kind. They're not looking at microarray data. They're looking at wastewater. They're looking at vaccine adoption in under-resourced communities. They're looking at genomics after vaccination. They're looking at all kinds of disparate things, and they figure, well, you know, we need some academic group to tell us how it's possible to integrate all this stuff in a way which makes it feasible to look at these data after the fact. I mean, there are 2 issues here. One of which the standards were not clearly defined at the start of the program. And the program is trying to integrate data from so many different sources that we have to figure out how to make that work. And the challenge is to impose a structure so that we know that a patient in one data set is a patient in another data set, as Mike was alluding earlier. And that requires some work, which I'll get to in a moment. But was there another question that I missed? Okay. So the idea is for a researcher to be able to discover data sets that are useful, to access them and to analyze them. That discovery process really just is a matter of search, but a search is only going to be effective if you have metadata that are sufficiently standardized that you can find the stuff that you're looking for. So we actually have built into the hub the idea of having really good search capabilities and really good data harmonization, which I'll get to later. In the data hub, not by our choice, but because it was convenient at the time, when Deloitte started working on the very first prototype of this system, they thought the dbGaP would be a good way to handle access. dbGaP has the advantage that if you have an ERA Commons login, then you can get a dbGaP authorization to get access to PHI that is stored in dbGaP. And so basically we had to adopt that mechanism so that people who come to the data hub can't just look around at protected data, they have to have authorization through dbGaP. And we can talk about the implications of that later.
So you do store patient identifying data?
Say again?
You do store patient identifying data?
Well, it is the responsibility of the DCCs to de-identify the data. And we have to assume that the data being sent to us are de-identified, but we do not know ourselves to what degree the de-identified data could possibly be re-identified.
Don't ask, don't tell.
Thank you. So getting back to Mike's question a minute ago, how do we deal with the idea that different studies may refer to the same thing by different names? And at NIH, there is religion about this idea called common data elements. I'm guessing some of you or many of you have not seen this before, but the idea is when one is doing a clinical trial, you have a case report form. A case report form is either web-based or paper-based, and it's how you enter data one visit to the next about how your patients are doing in the trial. And NIH 30 years ago said, you know, we have all these case report forms we're generating in all of our work, and they're all asking for the same kinds of things, like name of reporting source, date reported, name of case, location, occupation, place of work. But you know, they all ask those questions in different ways. What we need, what the world needs to be a better place are common data elements. So your CRFs, basically, instead of being composed of arbitrary questions framed in arbitrary ways, would use these common data elements that would ask the questions the same way. And you would be able to have a label that would say patient name. It wouldn't say patient, it wouldn't say name, it wouldn't say name of patient, it would say patient name. So it would be standardized. It would be a prompt that you would fill in to get more information about what's being required for that field, again, in a standardized way, and value sets. So you would make selections from the value sets and not have arbitrary numbers that would mean whatever you thought they might mean. So NIH has religion about CDEs. And in fact, it started at NCI, which I guess was the first institute at NIH to start doing the CDE stuff. And then ultimately, there became what is known as the NIH CDE repository, which is managed by the National Library of Medicine, which is hundreds and hundreds of CDEs. The problem with the CDEs in that library is that they're not always completely common. So there are in the CDE library 13 CDEs to specify a patient's address, 14 CDEs to specify a patient's name. And so even though the goal was to come up with something that would be totally standardized and uniform, that goal in the CDE library was not actually achieved. And and unfortunately, people have really strong attachments to one CDE versus another. And so there's a problem here. But in any event, that's not the subject of today's conversation, but helpful background.
But getting back to this, so can you have I realize you can't identify a person by their address, but can you recognize the same person in two different repositories? Is there any sort of master person index?
No, not in RADx. And the assumption is that you're lucky to get the same person involved in one clinical trial, not more as opposed to several. But
I mean, you can do probabilistic matching, but other than that, there's no tools for.
you probably do that probabilistically, but it's not a goal of the RADx users. What is really interesting about RADx is that the CDEs that are being used in RADx came from the top. There was at NIH early in the pandemic, the creation of what's called the NIH RADx Executive Committee. And the Executive Committee was a pretty high-powered committee. These were institute and center directors at NIH who got together to work on what the strategy for NIH should be for COVID. And what I find absolutely amazing is that these institute directors were responsible for coming up with the CDEs for the RADx program. And so they got together, they created what they called the Global Codebook. So I know this sounds like something out of a brand cereal box, but there was they didn't have a secret decoder ring, but they did have a global codebook, which was basically their list of CDEs that were going to be used for RADx. And really, what was a challenge is that even though the institute and center directors all wanted to have a set of very limited CDEs, getting the actual investigators doing the work in RADx to use those CDEs was a major challenge. And so one of the things that we've had to deal with in the hub is that although the goal was for all these studies to be done using the CDEs identified by the executive committee, one, the executive committee only really identified a handful of CDEs, so it didn't really cover the landscape very well. And two, getting people to use those CDEs was often like pulling teeth. I'll get back to that in a bit. So let's talk about the hub itself. There are lots of features in the hub. So there's a study explorer, which allows you to find studies that have been done on COVID patients and to find the ones that are relevant for you, see an overview page to see what they're all about, to understand what are the variables in the study so you can analyze those and how you can get requests for things that you might need. You register with the hub after you've registered with dbGaP. How do you get approved data? You have this analytics workbench and additional features. I'll share that as we look at these screen doors. So here's the Study Explorer. Basically, you can see on the left, faceted search that allows you to find the kinds of studies that you might be looking for in a wide range of different COVID problems. You get a list of the, on the right-hand side, if you will, of studies that meet the search criteria on the left. You can click on a study and you can see what that study is all about and learn more about it. And most important, when you look at the study, you really can get a sense for not only the information that's in the data hub, but the data hub is storing additional information like the original protocol for the study and additional README files that the investigators will want. So we provide not only the data, but also a lot of annotation that's helpful to people who want to explore those data. And then, of course, we have to use CEDAR for something. So because metadata is really important in being able to describe all of them, don't laugh, is required for all of these studies, we're actually using CEDAR templates as a way of structuring the study-related metadata so that we understand more about the studies, and we use BioPortal, of course, as a source of controlled terms, because this is Stanford, so we got it. With each study, you can then access a study, and then you can pull up an analytics workbench. Here's Jupyter Notebooks kind of embedded within the data hub. So a lot of the times you'll be accessing information from the hub, and right there in context, you'll be able to do various analytic kinds of things and do your analyses. You can also download data and run it through SAS if you actually have access to SAS or other kinds of stuff. So basically, we recognize that investigators will have a lot of different ways in which they may want to access and use COVID data. And RENCI has been really good at working with the whole team to develop mechanisms for tutorials, for providing frequently asked questions, basically giving people the educational access they need. There's a YouTube channel. And so for anybody who wants to actually learn how to access the hub, lots of great resources are out there to make that all fairly simple. Just stop, see if anybody has any questions. Okay.
No TikTok?
What? Well, we're not sure. We thought we might have to get rid of it, but maybe not now.
I heard the little red book or something like that is now the option if you have to get off TikTok.
Yeah, another Chinese.
Okay, so again, the data flow, you can imagine your individual investigators who submit their data to data coordinate centers. We get the data, and these are all the pieces that I already showed you through the screen dumps and all of the backend services that are required by the hub, allowing the users who need to get access to data to search for data, put them together, and hopefully do some work.
I see. So this is a repository of studies. It's not a repository of data. It's a repository of studies. The studies contain data. If you go to the study, you can find data, but there's no unification of data.
Right, and that was never the intention. Because we recognized early on that with so many different kinds of studies, there was no Uber model that would allow us to bring all that stuff together.
There's the RADx study hub.
Well, right, we don't. So that was never in our scope, and I agree with you.
So suppose I want to look at an underserved rural population who's using a new radical diagnostic techniques based on serum porcelain levels. My hope of actually unifying these two different worlds is.
There's an exercise in that Jupyter notebook.
Yeah, basically. What we do provide is obviously access to the variables that are used in the studies to just refer to the data that are collected. And users can use those variable descriptors as a way of trying to bring together relevant stuff.
So your users do the unification that I was expecting you were gonna do?
Well, you do what you're paid for.
Yeah, I know.
And I agree, there are other kinds of features that we would have achieved had that been in part of the vision, but it was not.
Were there earlier failed projects based on a more ambitious notion of data model?
You know, I don't know, anyone, I really try that, because right now, this is already an enormously complex project. And being able to bring together data in the way that you described would be very, very complicated.
I have a personal interest in this, and my guess is the Deloitte project probably was working with Oracle, which is where I worked for a while. And we developed based on HL7 RAM, a failed information model, the notion of a unified model of how you represent everything.
That's why the REM failed.
Yeah, but I was curious if that was part of the origin.
No one used that three-letter word.
Are there examples of unaffiliated investigators pulling out 3 to 4 studies, combining them and like having a new discovery? Does that happen?
No, that's what we live for. And that, at least as of now, that hasn't happened.
Right, so there is no wish for this data set, just like there is one for Geo.
That is correct.
There is only one for that.
Well, the data is still being submitted.
Say again?
The data is still being submitted, so one of the DCCs is only just kind of cleaned and uploaded all of their data. So
Recently.
yes,
Okay.
like in the last couple of weeks.
I think it's worth highlighting because, yes, right now there's only one Purvesh, but there might be other postdocs and students who could be future ones based on the studies accumulated.
Renzi is actually helping us and doing a great job trying to figure out ways of attracting new users who would not be as good as Pravesh, but aspire to be as good as Pravesh. And who might be able to do some of these kinds of studies.
But about 2.0.
No, that we have done, I think, a really great job of providing the mechanism to bring the data together. Part of the challenge that we've had is that, as I indicated earlier, this system has gone through a lot of evolution. And the original version, use a technical term, was pretty crappy. And it turned a lot of people off. And so one of the challenges that we've had is to come up with this new version, which I think is really much more slick. Booz Allen has done a great job in their software engineering.
Can you just give some boost to Deloitte?
Let's not go there. But because I think we now have a much better system, we're in good shape. But I do think the project was hampered because we spent 2 years dealing with a system that's not terribly attractive to end users. And frankly, a lot of people are losing interest in COVID as we move on to the next pandemic. So the timing has not been great. But I think still, there's a lot to be learned here. So, and let me just continue. You'll see that even we may not succeed to the degree that we would like in COVID, I think a lot of the things we've learned in building this system are going to be very valuable for managing data in general, and certainly helping with data integration in the future. But I'll open myself up to more darts and arrows. Any other questions?
How many studies roughly, like thousands, 10,000, hundreds? Hundreds?
Hundreds, that's all.
Okay.
Okay, so just to recapitulate, it's a cloud-based system with a lot of front-end services, which you saw in those screen dumps, a lot of back-end stuff, which basically Stanford will bring to the table. A lot of security, a lot of that is managed through dbGaP and the NIH Researcher Authorization Service. And really, as we've been alluding, the whole key to making this useful for investigators is to harmonize the data. Let me just say something else. I mentioned before that the RADx Executive Committee had religion about CDEs. I should just really emphasize that for the actual investigators doing these studies, not so much. And I think one of the disconnects to be aware of is that although people at the top have a lot of enthusiasm about standards, about standardized metadata, about data sharing, investigators have a very different job to do. They have to do a study, they have to get their study done, they have to get published, and they want to do it before they get scooped. And so their interest in being able to create the standardized data sets and the metadata annotations that would make their data sets useful to other investigators are not as strongly held. And what makes it more complicated is that in the RADx program, each one of those investigators was supported by program officers at institutes and centers at NIH who really were divorced from really worrying about the hub. And so investigators were getting a lot of reinforcement from their POs to do the work that would get their publications out and get their work disseminated, and not so much worrying about standardization. What that means is a lot of the stuff that was submitted to the DCCs was not exactly standardized. So harmonization really has become a goal for us, and an important goal, but it's one that's in the face of a history that made things not necessarily set in our favor. So what we need to do for harmonization is obviously to find the data and to use the data, and recognizing that NIH, through the executive committee, had its one set of standards. So here's a CDE called NIH Age, which has a bunch of numbers associated in various ages. So if you're 27, then well, I guess here's the age is listed just as a numeral. NIH education has a discrete value that has some corresponding to a meaning, and we have to recognize that these numbers in this value set have nothing to do with these numbers in the value set for this years of school, which was used by some investigator on some CRF that we know nothing about. And so our challenge is to figure out how do we map between the standard CDE and this value set and this investigator supplied enumeration, which we really have to figure out on the fly. And so what that means is we have a challenge here. We want to deal with the fact that we have conflicting standards. Investigators are using their own CRFs, case report forms, to acquire data, which don't use the CDEs that are endorsed by the executive committee. There's varying quality of the data. Investigators sometimes are not doing such a great job acquiring the data. Often data are missing, often data are wrong. And it really requires a fair amount of expertise to figure out how to put all this stuff together. So basically, we have multiple targets: the data themselves, the metadata that describe the study, the metadata that describe the files that the data come in, and data dictionaries that we can refer to that tell us what these enumerations actually mean in the CDEs. And basically, we have three different kinds of CDEs: those that are standardized across all RADx programs, or are supposed to be, basically the global codebook; those that are DCC specific, and those that are just anybody's data. And so really, this is a incredibly messy problem where we're coming in really too late to solve it the right way. And we're in a position where we have to use a data dictionary telling us what these enumerations in the metadata really mean. We have to figure out how we can convert those enumerations to terms that make sense. And we have to do this basically for a large number of data sets. And so basically what we are working on right now is to, and this is mainly Jimmy Yu's work, is to be able to come up with mechanisms whereby we can define rules for mapping between NIH education, for example, where 0 means never having gone to school, 1 means some school, 2 means high school, and another kind of enumeration, and recognize that these are not coherent. Sometimes you have several elements here that might map to one element here. Sometimes you might have an element here that has nothing to map to over here. And so it really is a very messy problem of coming up with the kinds of rules that would allow us to do that. And so we need to be able to figure out how do things map together? How can we be sure that when we're given a data set from a DCC, that we know what we need to do to it to make it and somehow compatible with everything else that's in the data hub. So what we're really trying hard, obviously, is to get the global codebook right, because that's the one that the executive committee cares about the most. And really that means using the global codebook as a centralized reference document, ensuring that every data dictionary that we have that could be mapped to the codebook does that, and that it includes mappings from DCC dictionaries from all of the centers, knowing that many of the DCCs are using descriptions which actually don't easily map to the global codebook, which is really a frustration for us. So we have a harmonization workflow where the data come in. Let's see. We have both the file metadata describing what's in the individual data elements, the study metadata, the data dictionaries, mapping all that to the codebook, and ultimately trying to transform what we get from the DCCs into files that are harmonized, consistent with the global codebook, available for search and integratable in the way that investigators want. And I'll just leave it to say, this is hard and it's complicated. And as you can gather, it's horribly ad hoc. So really what we're trying to do moving forward is to come up with a more useful way, a more scalable way of doing harmonization. And that means being able to harmonize in a way which can overcome the lossiness that we're dealing with now, that will allow us to basically take end user data descriptions and merge them into a way which is more coherent. That means basically coming up with a language for talking about mappings that we can reapply, a language that talks about what are the primitives like truncation and rounding and recoding and so on. And basically come up with rules that build on these primitives so that we have a canned way of applying rules to incoming data and basically enabling us to do those transformations and basically log our results to see how well we do. So we're trying to right now define harmonization rules in terms of remappings, in terms of unit conversions, in terms of casting types and histogram values and debt rounding and threshold numerical values and all the things that you don't really think about explicitly, but need to be done when you're dealing with messy data coming from a variety of sources. And the idea is to be able to come up with rules that bring together these primitive components and allow us to create a database of rules that we can then apply, taking in new data, applying the rules, and hopefully having things that are more systematic, more standardized, and ultimately more integratable. And I think that will be very exciting if we're successful there, because this ad hoc way of doing harmonization is not scalable, it's highly labor intensive, and really is not giving us the kind of results that we'd like. Yeah.
It's a really exciting effort. How do you think it's best to deal with cases where the same data just does not exist? Like I collected single cell sequencing, this person collected bulk RNA-seq, this other person got some ATAC-seq data. So the data across studies is just different.
Yeah. How do I deal with that? Well, I can't deal with it. I'm dealing with fundamentally different kinds of studies.
Yeah.
That means there's no free lunch. But I think what we can do is twofold. One is a cultural problem, and that is we need a mechanism whereby we can encourage program officers and sponsoring organizations to tell their grantees, we want you to make your data reusable for other investigators. We don't do that now. And if we had the program officers saying, look, we know you want to get the results out. It's important to us that you publish, but it's also important to us that you publish your data in a useful way. That would go a long way. And obviously, if we had mechanisms which would allow us to use kinds of transformations of data sets to ensure that they're compliant with the standards that people want to use globally, that would be valuable. But the challenge is, developing standards for data integration and data reuse. Basically, if we want more professions, we need more than just the technologies that do the mappings and do the conversions. We actually need to create a culture where people see value in being able to feed their data to profession in the first place.
But that even goes broader, right? We actually need to acknowledge that people like me, which Stanford has done, can actually get promoted. And they don't necessarily need to be generating their own primary
You
data.
can promote it.
I did, that's what I'm saying, the Stanford has done it,
Yes.
but the other institutes don't do it, right? That's a bigger.
Do you really think that
concern.
other institutions of education,
I don't think there is any other institute that has promoted somebody to full professor without ever writing an R01. It's very difficult to get.
you should be advertising that, by the way.
Should or shouldn't?
Should not.
But that's the advantage, like, that's the cultural change that is required. That what is important is the science that you do and not, the reason people don't deposit their data as broadly is because they think they can get a few more papers out, which would help towards their promotion in the next round.
Well, I'll respond to that by saying, I think you can actually write an R01 that would allow you to do secondary analysis of data, and that would get funded. So just,
NIH doesn't have a mechanism where if you were to say, I am going to do secondary analysis on this RO and I need an R01, it doesn't get funded. I tried and.
okay, but I don't think generating your own data is a necessary condition for an R01. It's only a sufficient condition.
Not in writing, but in practice.
But I will just say that places like Stanford are putting a lot more emphasis on making data sets available in a form where professionals can actually access those data and use them. For example, there's a draft that's being circulated at Stanford. I don't know if our faculty knows this yet. Where the idea would be to not only have a list of your publications, but a list of the data sets that you put into public repositories for secondary analysis. And a list of where those public repositories are located, what efforts were made to standardize the data sets so other people can make use of them. So I mean, I think things are changing and people are recognizing that bibliometrics are important, but also data publication and data sharing is important. And I think Stanford will hopefully start taking the lead in encouraging faculty to be able to want to enumerate their success at sharing data in addition to their publication success. But I realize the culture needs to shift. We are a culture that really encourages individual investigators who work alone, who don't talk to anybody, to do work. And increasingly, we're recognizing we need to figure out how team science can encourage us to share the wealth and have a larger cadre of collaborators than would be possible otherwise. And we have to recognize that sharing data is an important part of science. Look, Newton did not see the value in publishing his work. He thought if he put down all of his observations in a notebook, that would be good enough. And it took a lot of persuasion for scientists of that era to recognize that journal publication had a role. And it wasn't really until the 19th century that journal publication was viewed as a routine way of doing science. I think right now we're on the cusp of seeing data publication, data dissemination being part of routine science, but we're not there yet. But I think we'll be there soon. But we can certainly discuss this offline. But just to clarify, in case there was any concern, Protégé is a full professor. He was promoted. He has no basis for complaining.
I am not complaining, I'm actually saying it's unheard of in other institutes, which is thankful.
You should try at another institute then.
I'm cheaply doing that.
All right. Anyway, let's talk about what we've learned out of this. So we probably kind of knew this going in. We didn't have to figure this out as a consequence. But you need rich metadata, you need detailed study documentation, or no one's going to be able to look at your data sets and know what to do with them. The data request process basically has to balance security with accessibility. Right now, many of our potential users argue that we've really emphasized the security and perhaps emphasized that over accessibility. That's a problem. You need to have an ERA Commons login to get access to the data in the hub. And so you can't just be a high school student wanting to do a science fair project if you want to get COVID data out of the data hub right Really, we're doing a lot of work to collaborate with our data contributors, also doing a lot of work to collaborate with the potential data users. Basically, because this is a whole culture where we're trying to build, and we have to understand what is necessary to get our data contributors to do a better job of meeting standards. What is it that our data users need in order to do their particular work? And basically, we're recognizing that although in the best of all possible worlds, we would have tools that would make it so that when people create data sets or ask patients to fill out case report forms, everything would be standardized from the get-go. We don't live in that world. And we need mechanisms by which we can apply standardization approaches as early in the game as possible, recognizing we may be fairly late and need to be able to come up with creative ways of trying to standardize data even after they've been submitted to data coordinating centers. Our goals in going forward is obviously to make our data more findable, to make harmonization much more robust and scalable, to figure out how we can streamline data access to make it so that some of our data sets are not as difficult to access. And we want to be able to evaluate and refine the way in which we describe data sets with metadata and basically try to deal with the whole data flow process from investigator to hub. And one of the things that gets us excited is that people don't talk a lot about COVID-19. People don't talk all that much about infectious disease anymore. And if the next Congress gets its way, we won't talk about infectious disease for a while. But what we've done in the in the RADx Data Hub is come up with a very general architecture that deals with managing data that come from disparate sources in disparate formats that need to be harmonized, that need to be disseminated, that need to be integrated with tools that allow for analytics. And so where we think we have a future may not necessarily be with COVID itself, but with a more generalized approach for creating data coordinating centers. One of the things that is totally crazy in this world is that you have lots of investigators who put in proposals to do large projects to acquire data in some area of science. And each one of those proposals has puts in a core, if you will, for data management, where each proposal builds its own data coordinating center from scratch, using its own technology, using its own approach to standardization. And it is just unbelievable that we keep reinventing the wheel every time we have to do another large project that involves data management. And one of the things that I see coming out of the RADx Data Hub, in addition to hopefully providing the world's best platform for analyzing data related to COVID diagnostics, is an architecture that can be replicated for new data coordinating centers, so that when people do projects of this nature, they're not starting from scratch. They're not going through multiple iterations, throwing out large amounts of software engineering because they didn't get it right the first time. But frankly, having a reference model will make it a lot easier to do this kind of work going forward. So let me stop there, and let's see, we have a little bit of time for some more questions. Yeah, thanks.
Good question. So I'm curious about the harmonization process when you're working with different studies and maybe the CDEs. And I was looking at one of the examples you had of like the level of education somebody has.
Yeah.
In the cases where you have very slight wordings for a given value, say like you have a high school diploma, somebody else says you have a high school diploma or a GED.
Yeah.
Like, what's your process for making decisions about those, and to what extent are the original investigators involved?
That is a great question. And the original investigators are long gone from this conversation, unfortunately. We're trying to reach out to them to the extent that we can. A lot of it is just judgment on our part. And I think really what we'd like to see come out of this work would be processes, SOPs, if you will, for how to adjudicate these kinds of discrepancies, because they're all over the place. And whether it really means the same thing to have a GED as a high school diploma is a philosophical question that I don't really want to get into. But we can make an expedient call, but we don't know necessarily if it's the right one. I'll ask Matthew, do you want to?
I think that's a good answer. It's really unfortunate that we don't have access to the investigators, and even if the investigators were still around, we still wouldn't have access to them. We have to go through the GCCs. So there's that kind of social barrier as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, you know, put this in the terms of Rodney King, it's a shame we can't just all get along. You really like a world where there would be some consensus about standards for something as simple as high school education, where we wouldn't have these great debates about whether high school education and GED are equivalent. It would just be known. We wouldn't have 14 common data elements for address. We would have, you know, a consensus on what it means to specify an address for a person. We don't have that yet. And part of the problem is that people believe that their way is always best. People like the way they do things. And it's hard to do standardization because it means somebody has to give up a preferred way of expressing something. And again, these are not technical problems, these are human problems. We have to come up with ways of overcoming them.
So can I ask, so like, you know, where do you see the role of like large language models and foundation models in abstracting away a lot of these friction points? Like we're in a world where a lot of stuff, you know, OpenAI, you interact with a model, it can do, you know, some estimate of uncertainty and alignment. You can learn feedback from as users interacting with it. Is there a future where like data coordinating centers are actually learning from how people use and fail and fix data harmonization questions? Because like, you know, I don't necessarily know if you'll ever get people to like, you know, all go one direction, but like if you could have a very flexible interlingua, so you can specify your address in whatever way you want, and a model can sort of make it good enough to go, you know, maybe that's a good, you know, a good delta on where we are now. I'm just curious, like, is that like wildly, you know, CS overly optimistic in practice, or?
It's not overly optimistic, but one has to be cautious. Somi has done a lot of work in this area, actually. One of the things we've learned is that, well, look, in the data hub, we're working really hard to make sure that the data sets that are put into the hub are as standardized as possible and are as searchable as possible and reusable as possible. But, you know, no matter how hard we work on something like that, what do you do about the gazillion data sets that are already out there that are crap? What you'd really like to be able to do is take the existing inventory of NIH acquired data and put it in a form where it's more standardized and therefore more searchable and more usable and more integratable. I think that's really the holy grail.
Do you like, yeah, I guess one, you know, having done a lot of like sort of post-hoc data curation myself in like the NLP space, there is a point where you're sort of like, you have to say goodbye to a data set, like it's beyond saving. Do you think, like, do you think that holds in more the biomedical space?
Well,
like
so
there's
much
always
money
going to
has been
be,
spent creating those data sets, and I would love to figure out how to make better use of them.
right?
And they also don't like the idea of having to admit that they're not searchable and usable.
Yeah, I get, yeah, there's some honest.
So it turns out that if you apply an LLM to looking at data in a standard repository like Biosample, it does a really crappy job of trying to convert the existing metadata into something that's more standardized. Because what do you train out LLMs on? You can't. You'd love to train them on good metadata, but there's not a lot of good metadata on which to train them. So you're just kind of stuck that way. You deal with LLMs that are trained on the kinds of texts that are out there in the world, and what you find, they do things that are extremely literary. So they recognize that if you say the tissue is lung cancer, they know lung cancer is not a kind of tissue. They know there's something wrong with it. The LLM will detect there's something wrong with that. But what you get is you get a correction like lung afflicted with cancer, which seems very literary and something you can imagine coming out of some text on the web somewhere, but it's not the answer you want either. And where Somi has done work that I think has been really good is to try to inform the LLM with a CEDAR template saying, this is how we expect the metadata to appear. And providing that jumpstart makes it possible to get the LLM to do things which are much more intelligent than what we do right now. We don't have time now to talk to her later. She'll tell you all about that work.
Well, thank you.
Just to add something quickly there, you know, we also think about small tasks that in the short term could be addressed with LLMs. For example, if you think about harmonization, LLMs are pretty good at suggesting mappings, right? So the task of finding mappings between variables and between the values of different variables, that kind of assistance could be helpful. Or also, if you have multiple data sets and you want to come up with a standard for them, that kind of global code book for them, that could provide some suggestions and pick the most granular approach to those. So we are already thinking about small tasks in which those kind of technologies can help in the short term. In the long term, let's see what happens.
Anybody else? Yeah, wait. We have time? No, we have no time. Well, I'll talk to you afterwards. Okay, thanks, everybody.
Agents that are certain kinds of yeah.